This week, we welcome back Michael Roitman from Kenna Security for a discussion on XDR and vitamins. How do we know the security protections we're investing in are working? Next up, Dan DeClaus from PlexTrack returns to join us for a technical segment on how tall do you have to be to ride the ride? In the security news, why privacy is like bubble wrap. South African government releases its own browser just to re-enable Flash support. Former LulzSec hacker releases a VPN not 0 day used to hack hacking team. How a researcher broke into Microsoft VS Code GitHub, and how criminals used a deceased employee's account to wreak havoc. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. PlexTrack is the platform that helps cybersecurity practitioners get the daily work done. Red teams can create reports in half the time and track risk to resolution with the blue team. Teams can centralize remediation efforts across all scans, assessments, and audits. Effectively communicate risk in real time through simple visualizations, scanner and ticketing integrations, and robust analytics. PlexTrack is perfect for collaboration across all teams. Visit securityweekly.com/PlexTrack to claim your free month. Want to be more thorough while also working faster? It doesn't matter if you're on the red or blue team, an augmented reality overlay can enable you to be more thorough and faster at the same time. No glasses, no goggles. Polarity delivers this superpower as an overlay on top of your existing workflow and tools. The free Community Edition connects to the data you care about to overlay the context you need to make informed decisions. Apply for early access today at securityweekly.com/polarity.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who has the long hold on the Kickstarter campaign for Baldo, Mr. Paul Xdr.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 681, recorded on January 28th, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, the fabulous, the illustrious Mr. Larry Pesce.
Did you say Ball Security Weekly?
I said Paul's Security Weekly? I did. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, either way. Yeah, I whatever. Either way.
Hey, it's good to have you here in studio.
Yeah.
Nice to be around other human beings.
Somewhat
Socially.
close enough.
Probably should be more socially distanced. That's really difficult for Larry and I.
I know.
On the lines remotely, Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome.
Happy Data Privacy Day, everyone.
It is Data Privacy Day. You know that you can make any day like a day. There's like a whole website and
it's Blueberry Pancake Day today.
Is it like a consortium? Like what is it? What is it? Is there laws? There's not.
I think it's like buying a star. Somebody just
threw everybody at the
created a database, and you pay $20 and you got a day.
I gotcha.
But isn't there only 365 of those days? That seems like a really bad business decision.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome. You can overload the days, Tyler. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't just have to be Blueberry Pancakes Day. It can be also Quack Like a Duck Day and
Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Yes.
Seems an awful lot like everybody gets the trophy kind of thing. So I don't know. It's losing its speciality.
Everyone can have a day. Every day is your day.
Today is my day.
Today is your day. There's no Joff, no Lee.
Wow.
Wait, wow.
Nope, that's it.
Wow. It's
weird.
It is. It's weird. Anyway, announcements. Hey, next Thursday, February 4th, 11 a.m. Why do I say p.m.? 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Our first technical training. You'll learn how to manage insider risks in the work from anywhere world. You can register at securityweekly.com/webcasts. Of course, if you missed any of our previous webcasts, you can go to securityweekly.com/on-demand. This segment is sponsored by Kenna Security. You can visit securityweekly.com/Kenna Security to learn more. Joining us today, of course, is Kenna's chief data scientist, Michael Roitman. Joining us once again to talk about XDR and vitamins. Michael, welcome back.
Thank you.
We loved you so much. We had to have you back.
Vitamins?
Well, it's Paul's Security Weekcast best episode of Podcast Day.
There you go.
I just registered it online.
Very nice. Very nice.
Very nice.
I have to look back on my notes and figure out how we got to a point of relating XDR to vitamins. Oh, yeah, it's coming back to me now.
I think it was Joe Rogan's podcast, the thing that relates all things to each other.
Yes. It is, Joe's show is amazing just for that. Just the breadth of topics they cover on that show is really amazing. We'll try and stick to mostly security-related topics with an occasional diversion into vitamins, I guess, on this segment. But we started off, and believe it or not, Michael and I, we're completely sober, I believe, when we had the conversation to figure out what we're going to talk about. And if you believe that, I'll tell you another one. But we started off by saying we were going to try and define what XDR means. What is XDR? Because we've got EDR. What's the other DR? There's regular disaster recovery, right? There's endpoint detection and response. And then all of a sudden there was this XDR. And I'm like, what does that mean? Is that like xylophone data recovery? What does it mean? What is XDR? Let's start
there.
There
Used to be a DDR.
Dance Dance Revolution?
East Germany.
Oh.
It's a great game. Oh, the Democratic Republic. I was born there.
Deutsche Democratic Republic, East Germany.
I was born on a Soviet base in Potsdam.
Oh, wow.
And here I was trying to tell people we're going to stick to security, and now we know that's not going to happen.
Well, this
Wait a
isn't
minute.
exactly vitamins.
I need to go get my tinfoil hat a minute. Go ahead.
XDR.
So I Googled right before joining this because I was like, oh, we got to talk about that. Let's figure out what XDR actually is. I did not get a good answer, but I did get to Cisco's website where they have EDR and XDR next to each other.
If you scroll down a little past the sponsored ads, you might do better.
Oh.
Whoever can afford the most money in Google advertising gets to define the term. Is that what we're saying? Because
I think that's true for all terms.
Yeah, it's true.
That's just how terms work nowadays. But once you read it, you still don't know what XDR is. It just tells you it's better than EDR, and there's more stuff included.
Because it's extra.
I mean, already I want it. Whatever it is, I want it.
So it's like machine learning and AI combined with EDR and everything else. It's got to have some acronyms.
Here's the question: what are you buying? Are you buying vitamins or are you buying X vitamins? Which ones are better? Obviously,
I'm going with X vitamins for $200.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
I'd even pay more.
Right?
It's like regular men versus X-Men. Like clearly the X-Men are better.
Clearly the X-Men are better. So clearly.
Although there does seem to be some debate whether the X-Men are better or not in the actual show. That's like the central point of debate there.
Of course.
We could do a whole hour-long topic on that. That alone. Coming up next week. So we still don't know what XDR is.
Well,
all right. We're still early in the segment.
I got some idea.
It's okay.
You have your antivirus, which is like stuff when I was a small child. Then you've got EDR, which is the evolution of that. So you've got a couple more sensors, you got agents, you got malware detection capability. I think that's the transition from we block stuff to we can actually detect malware in your box. XDR, I think, is all of that. More agents, more sensors. There's a lot more tools nowadays. A lot more stuff is cloud-based, but threat information piped in from the cloud into your EDR platform. I think that's the fundamental breakpoint for me.
Do I get it through a single pane of glass though? Because that's really, I hear vendors talking about that, and I really want my single pane of glass.
Larry, reach over and smack him.
No, but seriously though, are they leveraging like some of the more advanced like machine learning for like a lack of a better term, where they're numerically trying to represent binaries or malware and then classify those at a threshold for a detection capability? Like, is that what like the next iteration of EDR is?
That's my bet. My bet is it's like there's data intelligence. You can now actually get a live stream of updated information onto your agent that's doing the assessment, or your cloud panel that's your pane of glass, double pane, triple pane, whatever. But the real differentiator is that you can process that information in real time based on the context of the machine, which is something that an individual would usually do in the old framework. And that probably comes from some kind of machine learning.
Well, I think I can help here. So when I go to DuckDuckGo and I search for XDR, right?
Oh, nice.
McAfee's the number one result, sponsored result. Interesting. There's also an XDR off-road performance upgrades, but then extended detection and response. Extended.
See, I know Carbon Black was working on something similar to this. One of my buddies, Moo, was doing some work for Microsoft on their ML team, and Carbon Black had something, I think it was called Biny. There's something about binary emulation environment where it was analyzing these using machine learning by giving it like a graphical or numerical weight, and then they were doing things on top of that.
That's like
and so this kind of real time.
But
Elastic had one too, right? Leaf, I think is what it was.
But in all seriousness, though, I think it extends beyond the endpoint, because what I kind of understand is to be is related to somewhat to my enchanted quadrants, as I call them, that in order to detect indicators of compromise, you want to look at 4 basic areas in your organization. One is your endpoint, one is your network, one is logs from all other sources, we typically call that SIM, and one is threat intelligence. And it sounds like that's what a lot of vendors that had maybe some of these pieces, maybe all of these pieces, put it together and called it extended detection and response. But it really represents, in my mind, the 4 areas that I define that you need to look at in order to be successful at detecting indicators of compromise.
Paul, did you invent XDR? Are you the one buying all the Google AdWords?
No, because I'm not the... Because before it was a triad, right? It was endpoint, network, and SIM, and then others added. I'm not the only one to come up with the concept. I won't lay claim to it. I won't lay claim to creating XDR and taking out Google Ads. I definitely did not do that.
But I think we're getting to the first point where I think I actually have something to contribute. I think that's right. I think it's global context from threat intelligence, local context from your machines, all coming into one place. One of those things could be detecting malware on the box. One of those things could be prioritizing the vulnerabilities on that box. One of those things could be, deploying rules in block mode that are going to work because you know some of that context. But all of that is happening because of an underlying trend, which is customers are demanding that each of these 4 quadrants has an API that can interconnect with every other tool they've bought. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I remember logging into the Dell SecureWorks, it was Dell SecureWorks at that point, WSDL portal and trying to get a PDF out by querying a search parameter string. That was the API of the day. Today, you can get the vulnerability on a box from Carbon Black over the air, right? The world has changed in that regard.
I'm curious how they're aggregating all of this mass amounts of data between disparate telemetry points. Not everybody's on Microsoft, and Microsoft's not sharing their data. Obviously, you have ATP, you've got all the EDR vendors that are aggregating their own data and building their own threat platforms. So these advanced and machine learning algorithms, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the math guy on this side of this, but the accuracy
no, he's
of
not.
those
He's
is
a
only
data
as good
scientist.
That involves
he's
math.
a data guy.
It
does involve a lot of freaking math.
Data science is actually X math, not just math. That's the difference.
There you go.
But all of that
X or
relies
math.
on the quality of your data, right? Or the data sets in which you provide it to learn from. So if they're not aggregating this between all these disparate products, does that mean we're still at the exact same spot because they're doing exactly what they were doing with their own data in the first place?
Yes and no. So no, because bringing in data from the SOC, the detect and response side, and adding data from the VM side, from the config side to the same place allows you to build a model that has an outcome. The outcome is, how do I stop the thing that I've been detecting on the IDS side from happening on this particular box? And there's a model you can build for that. But I do think you're hitting on an important point. We've got these citadels, relevant term to today, we've got these citadels of information that plays well together. Microsoft is a great example. Carbon Black's a great example. CrowdStrike is a great example. Cisco's a great example. McAfee's a great example. All of them have each piece. But actually, I want to know what you guys think. I don't know if customers is my word that I use, if enterprises really are going to pick just one and say, I'm going to buy every product from them because it's better than the sum of its parts when I have them. I think it's best of breed depending on what fits your needs here and there, and then maybe the combination won't be possible anyways.
Yeah,
well, the ability to integrate and collaborate, right? Like if they don't integrate and there's a best of breed, that's actually a negative factor, and you may end up using a less a product that's not as good because it integrates. So I've seen that quite a bit, where you end up with a great logging system but a horrible EDR, or you end up with a great EDR, but then your alerting and SOC
but Tyler,
visibility is different.
From the same vendor or different vendors? Like, do I, in your example,
almost always different vendors.
Oh, well, because I was wondering, like, do I go to one vendor that was traditionally a SIM vendor, and I don't want to shame anyone, right? And they've added this capability to do some endpoint stuff, and they've added some capability to do some network stuff, and they're like, my joke about single pane of glass was, I was only half kidding, right? Because they're like, well, we can do all of this for you. But what you were just describing is what I thought was this scenario where, yeah, they still do logging really well. Maybe they do the network pretty well too, but like their endpoint is pretty terrible. But I'm going to go with them because they've got all the pieces that they've integrated together, and I can use it.
I think that's where Microsoft's made their huge leaps and bounds, right? Is like their EDR product, Defender, for lack of, it's kind of come up and had horrible branding, but ATP, ATA, the threat analytics and threat protection, and Defender, and the integration.
It's not horrible branding.
Telemetry.
They're just a lot of branding.
They just keep redoing whatever they're doing, or they integrate new features, right? But I think having that single pane of glass at the cloud, having a Active Directory that is on-prem and in the cloud, having that ATP that looks at Office 365, looks at your endpoints, having Intune that's configuring all these, so that kind of all these products where they're starting to do all these things really well, and they're actually utilizing their telemetry from the last 5 years and redesign. I think that's where they've started to make some huge leaps and bounds in a security standpoint and an adoption standpoint, because people have that single pane of glass. People have a lot of the products that are actually working and they're going to use anyway. And so now that they've got, less to choose from, I think that's where I think some of the security product vendors are starting to feel the pressure that Microsoft's been putting on them.
And I think that pressure is coming from, so there's the tools that are playing nicely together that allow you to have your glass. But on top of that glass is, you said this just a second ago, 5 years of telemetry data that they can use to make each one of those products better. So there's a global repository of data that's useful in integrating those products together that different vendors have uniquely to themselves. So a great SIM will have great SIM data to build models for that, and maybe their other products aren't as great, but they can leverage that advantage. So Microsoft's done a really great job with that. I think that's what XDR is. I think XDR is actually, let's use our data moats telemetry to make the idea of buying every offering from one vendor more palatable, because those things are actually improved by the combination.
It's interesting how enterprises come to the decision whether or not to go with consolidate under one vendor versus going with multiple smaller vendors and integrating them together. I'm curious what everyone's collectively in the panel today on the show sees in the wild. Do you see people leaning more towards going with one big vendor to solve multiple problems because it's already integrated, or do you see companies going after best of breed and integrating those things together themselves? Or is it my guess is it's probably like a mixed bag, right? Depending on what technology we're talking about.
Well, my experience with customers, get your drinks ready, primarily in the PCI world, they tend to invest in what I would just call point solutions. They've got a PCI requirement they got to meet. What's the tool that's going to get them there?
What's the cheapest tool that's going to allow me to meet the requirements?
Well, yes. That's where it's a mix between the cheapest tool or sometimes they go best of breed, or not even best of breed, but the one everybody knows. Nobody gets fired for buying McAfee to do endpoint protection, or
they have XDR now,
antivirus solution. But we'll get back to that. But for the most part, I I don't think I ever saw any company, and still haven't seen a company within that realm that is. They might want to try to go with one vendor, but they've already invested in all these different tools. They want to use them.
Yeah.
They're not ready to jettison them. It's funny, when we were at Tenable, I was trying to talk Tenable and promoting what they called Security Center at the time. Now it's just Tenable. I was trying to get them to understand, look, Security Center does a lot of the things that meet the requirements within Requirement 10, which is the logging and monitoring requirement section of PCI. But they're like, oh, we don't want to go there because we don't want to call ourselves a SIM. We don't want to play in that market because, and I'm paraphrasing, Gartner wouldn't put us in the upper right corner of the magic square or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, fine. So you don't have to say that you're a SIM solution. Just say you meet the logging and monitoring requirements. Because everybody goes out and says, oh, well, we got to get a SIM to meet this requirement. And, what are the name brand, what are the recognizable, SIM providers? And that's what they'd have. I had a client that I was able to get them on a call with one time that already was they had Security Center already for doing vulnerability scanning and other things, and they already had an investment in a SIM solution. I said, well, why don't you just talk to them about you can start using Security Center to start doing some of these things.
Jeff, what was that called? What was the component of Security Center that did the logging? I don't remember what it's called. Wow.
Yeah, you had to ask.
I know, because that was bugging me. I can't remember what it's called now, and I'm sure you couldn't find it on their website now because they've.
No, but I probably have it.
It's been a long time since we.
Not that I have anything that I used to have at Tenable in my archive.
Not that we kept any
keep
documentation from a previous company that we worked at.
Log correlation engine.
Log correlation engine. Yes. LCE. Yes.
LCE.
Whew, thank you. I feel better now. Okay.
And but I was like, okay, so just pitch this one customer, and this was a Fortune 100 enterprise customer. Pitch them on start using this for the extended functionality, or get the LCE portion.
Yeah.
And the next time you're up for license renewal for the product that you have already that you've invested in, and the CISO or whatever, it's his baby, but nobody likes it, and it's never worked and done anything that's been advertised. Common story. You don't have to renew it, and I tried to get them start marketing this thing to look. You can solve multiple problems with one product, not go to one. Not sort of like we're saying, do we go with a customer to do all the things? But any of my customers would have been giddy to think that they could buy one product point solution that could meet multiple requirements in different areas. That, to me, was a compelling pitch or compelling story, but of course I couldn't get them to jump on it.
And do they meet it, or do they meet the requirements well enough? That's always been my question, and it's always kind of fallen short of when I go to large vendor. We mentioned Cisco, and we'd always be buying a bunch of, back in the day, a bunch of network gear and all that stuff, and they'd be like, oh, you're the security guy. We just bought these 26 security companies, and we've got security products. And I'm like, yeah, but all my friends said that none of them work. This is 15, 20 years ago.
Okay, so this is the vitamins part that I wanted to bring up. I'm remembering it.
All right.
An essential component of this is everybody wants to consolidate all these security tools, single pane of glasses. We've been talking about it for my entire life in security. XDR is just the latest push, in my opinion, and it has some credibility behind it because let's consolidate them in a way that is more than the sum of their parts. Build machine learning models on top of them. We now have APIs. We have the cloud. Great. But the reason people don't switch from a tool that they have that does meet the requirements or doesn't, or works as advertised or doesn't, to something that you're telling them you should switch to, and then you have two from me and I can give you something that's 1 + 1 = 3, is that I don't think anybody actually knows whether their security tools are working or not.
But
it's just like taking vitamins.
I feel good that I'm running it, right?
Oh yeah.
That now it's come back to me, Michael. This is what we're talking about.
Pineapple CBD drink. That's what we were talking about.
Pineapple CBD drinks, right? It was. So I was taking magnesium as a supplement for good brain health and to improve focus. But what I found was
So clearly it didn't
How's
work.
that working for you?
Exactly. But this is the point, right? I'm like, is it working? Is it not? I don't know. All I know is like if I happen to like run out and didn't replenish my supply and I stopped taking it, I felt really depressed. I'm like, what is going on? What the hell is going on? I don't have anything to be depressed. Like, life is pretty good. Like, I got a pretty good. What is going on? And then I did a Google search and I was like, oh, apparently if you stop taking magnesium, it makes you super depressed. I'm like, well, that sucks. Got to get off of this stuff. So we were talking about Joe Rogan podcast, and I'm like, well, he's promoting all this stuff, and I'm like, I promote stuff on the show. I'm like, I believe in the stuff that we promote. I'm like, Joe probably does too, because he makes a living at it. So I'm like, I'm gonna try some of the stuff that Joe's promoting, and so I started taking the on it Alpha Brain. So I got off the magnesium. I'm on the Alpha Brain, and Michael's like, is it working? I'm like, I don't know. I feel like it is. Like, I don't know. But, like, I feel attached to the brand because I like Joe Rogan podcast. So, will you keep taking it? Will you keep with that sim vendor? Because whatever the reason is, you feel good about it. But is it really working for you, and how do you measure it? And that's where we came down to XDR and vitamins. How do we know it's really working? How do we measure the success of the supplements we take? Like, I don't know. I take vitamin D, too. Like, I feel like it's working. Like, how do you know?
You should totally try colloidal silver.
What is that?
Colloidal silver.
Oh, what's that supposed to do?
Turns you blue if you take it long enough.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, that I might have a need for that in my life.
At least you know if it's working, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of the point,
right?
The little light is flashy,
Right.
right?
That's where testing still comes into play, right? That's where pen testing and purple teaming, that's where
Agreed, Tyler.
the value really is there. Like, and by all means, I usually encourage customers to do bake-offs, and we'll offer discounted rates to do bake-offs, because before you go putting a product in and we want you to be more secure, we would rather you have a product in there that we could work with that's high quality. So let's make sure you effectively can test that and then pick one that's within inside of your list that you've already come up with. That provides a great avenue and dialogue between the people that have to go against these tools and actually know whether they work or not, and the people that have to purchase and make the decisions around the tools.
But I mean, testing is important, and also because the vitamins may work for me. Maybe I do some testing and realize like they work for me. Does that mean they can work for Larry or Tyler? Same thing with whatever security solution you have. Might be working for you. Tyler came in, tested it, like works pretty good. Put that in another organization with a completely different team. Maybe that doesn't work for them, right? I mean, there's something to be said. Like, I don't like to take a code editing solution away from a developer. If they're cranking out code and it works, I'm like, dude, whatever works for you, right? Like, I'm not going to tell you what tool to use because someone else may have a different tool. May work great for them, even though it might be Nano. And I may not agree with that.
Emacs.
If you can crank out code in Emacs and Nano, more power to you. Michael, sorry.
No, I completely agree with you. I think it's the environment that you're deploying a solution on also determines how well it works. I think the thing I want to bring to our attention is that the fact that we have trouble measuring how good a security tool is from the get-go, and I forget the marketing. I mean, let's imagine you had every tool and you had to actually measure it. Not an easy thing to do. This guy, George Akerlof, he's actually Janet Yellen's husband, won the Nobel Prize for this in economics. The lemons market for cars. The reason why new cars are so expensive is because a buyer has no idea whether one car is going to be reliable or good over another one. As soon as you drive it off the lot, it drops in price because now you've driven it, you know something about it. You're learning something about it. So the pen testing as testing, the purple teaming as testing is actually a great call. It tells you you're taking it for a drive. You're learning something about how it actually works in the wild. That might be the only way to tell the difference between these tools. And if consolidation of vendors, getting to this XDR world requires us to switch out some tooling, I think we need better ways to figure out if our vitamins are working first before we move into that space.
Yeah, because the other thing is many of us, if not probably all of us on the show today, have tested products in some capacity and maybe come to the conclusion that, you know what, it wouldn't matter if I'm running solution A or solution B. I would have gotten enough value out of it to have it serve its purpose, right? I did this with vulnerability management, so vulnerability scanners. And I'm like, yes, there's some nuances between them, but like at the end of the day, they're all of the major ones anyway are discovering enough vulnerabilities that the differences between them in a lot of environments maybe wouldn't make a difference, right? Again, you'd have to do further study and test it in your environment. And also that depends on the user using them and how your processes are different, right? But at the end of the day, maybe it wouldn't matter. You pointed to, Michael, a paper called The Market for Silver Bullets by Ian Grigg. And admittedly, I did not read beyond the abstract, but if you could talk about that paper and how it applies to what we're talking about now.
Yeah, this is a classic on shout out to SIRA, Society Information Risk and Security Metrics mailing lists that people have forumed and email listed all day long about. This is the application of that Lemons Market Nobel Prize to security. And the idea is that security is a lemons market. If you're a buyer, you are attempting to distinguish between products that you have no idea how they're actually going to work once you do buy them. This is why I think pretty uniquely we do pretty long POCs as an industry, and why we don't see as much switching as we would expect. We don't see as much consolidation as you would think we would have. At this point, we just have more and more security vendors entering, and all the pundits, all of us are sitting here talking about the consolidation of the markets, but it's happening pretty slowly. It's happening slower than new ones are entering the landscape. When I think about ways, so IDOS Labs tried to do this, right? Try to objectively measure it. I think there's the Gartners of the world, the Forrester Waves of the world that are trying to evaluate these products. But it's a step removed still. It's the same thing as Consumer Reports telling you go buy this car versus this car. It's very different than you seeing the results of deploying a solution immediately in your environment, knowing that the vitamin's working. And I think...
Go ahead, Michael.
Maybe the hope here. Everybody needs to weigh in on this because my confidence in this statement is like 20%. The hope here is that if the push towards XDR is combine a bunch of tools so that you can build models on them, the one thing I do know about is models. There are great ways to measure the efficacy of a model and whether it's getting better or worse over time. So maybe that XDR world is what's going to allow us to measure the efficacy of using one scanner versus another under the hood when all three other tools stay stable.
And also thrown into that equation is what I found is that, okay, let's say you measure, like I did, vulnerability scanners. And I pointed out differences and similarities. And I was like, in some scenarios, maybe you want to have all three of the major VMs out there. And Michael, you said you see people doing just that. And I'm like, I don't know that that's a good or bad thing. If it's working for them, okay. Like, I'd want to learn a little more about why. I kind of know why, because there is this weird non-overlapping coverage model, right? Where I discovered, and you could probably do the same discovery today, that across the three major players, right? Rapid7, Tenable, and Qualys, that within some degree, and again, you'd have to measure it again. It was a long time ago that I measured it, but any one scanner had overlap with each other, but also a certain percentage of things that they did not cover, that they did cover that the other ones did not. And that was true, like no matter how you built the matrix, right? There was always some stuff that vendor A covered that vendor B didn't, that vendor C didn't, but vendor C covered stuff that the other two didn't. So it worked in like every direction.
The one big problem with that, and I think the problem that we run into is the complexity of the uniqueness of every network. You run into not only the differences and disparities between technologies and what's been implemented and legacy, or how the environment's changed and what applications they have to support with inside the vertical, but you also run into a configuration issue. Well, there's a ton of tools that have capabilities. Most of those capabilities, in order to effectively use them or do them right, that requires tuning, and that requires a lot of fundamental changes of configurations and that are going to be very specific.
And Tyler, that was I should state, I was measuring as best I could the CVEs that were covered, which again has all of its caveats, right? It was a different set of testing that I would do to say, well, how does this stuff actually work in the real world?
But those are known tests, right?
Yeah.
And that works.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that's another issue that we run into is malware and viruses and ransomware and just the threat landscape overall has changed, where we have polymorphic viruses. We've got the ability to pack, encrypt, and modify and XOR and do all of these different TTPs that, change and throw off signatures and even minor nuances of behavior. And so it's not as though you can just detect a certain vulnerability within inside of a piece of computer or technology. You have to be able to detect anomalous behavior. You have to be able to detect heuristic behavior, and you have to be able to detect both of those together in combination with normal behavior that a user does versus the same behavior that an attacker might be doing.
Well, I think there's two different problems that we're trying to solve. And I think on one hand, when I talk about my enchanted quadrants for indicators of compromise, that's on the detection, more on the detection front. I want to take in data and I want to analyze it and see if there are any maybe precursors to attacks, active attacks happening, but more so it's historical record, like was there an attack that was happening on any of my systems and or networks? I have different quadrants to measure, which I think really, and Michael, this is your space, really that's about prioritization. When I look at the vulnerabilities in my systems, the configuration and the patching levels of my systems, that when you kind of put those two models together, if you will, really helps me maybe prioritize, right? Prioritize my response, but prioritize my operations as to what issues I may address first and where my gaps are.
So I think we actually hit on the answer, but I don't think the industry is there yet. And I'm at fault for this too. I don't think I'm there yet. The way that you figure out whether a tool is more or less effective than another one is you have to have outcome metrics. And for vulnerability scanning, an outcome metric could be coverage. That's a great metric. Another one could be, efficiency at catching exploits or something. You find that metric, and then you swap out the underlying technology to see how that metric has changed for your particular organization. Now, in reality, the computation of those metrics needs to be something pretty automatic, right? This is on the vendor side. Vendors should be providing those kinds of outcome metrics. Maybe they're configurable, maybe they're not. Similarly, when I source threat intelligence, I go out to like Proofpoint, Reversing Labs is a company we work with, Exodus Intelligence. And some of these are OEM relationships where we pay them and then we use that to do the prioritization. How do I know that a threat feed is better or worse than another one? Should I buy iDefense if I already own Recorded Future? Is a question that's super hard to answer unless you have a metric that you're trying to maximize.
How much do they cost? I want the cheapest.
Well, I mean, Jeff brings a good point. Cost is certainly a variable in your equation.
Absolutely. Yeah. It should be a variable in the matrix, right? You might see a 10% reduction in coverage, but you just saved yourself $900,000 for your vulnerability scanner. Maybe that's worth it.
Right. Definitely. But so have you published how you study and evaluate threat feeds? Because to be fully transparent, we're working on building a labs component, which is coming along very well. I'm very excited about it. And I don't want to be the entity or source that's saying, you should buy this product over that product, right? Because that's just, I don't think there's much value in that based on everything we've said during this segment, essentially. I want to be more of the, here's how you evaluate, here are some of the features and capabilities, and here's how you evaluate, because I think that's more valuable. And so, Michael, when you say you've evaluated some of the threat feeds, my question to you is, how have you evaluated them?
Let's get specific. So we have two metrics we really care about when we look at threat intelligence data. There's replication, and then there's coverage. So replication is, I've got a set of threat intelligence. Let's say I've got a set of MD5s tied to CVEs that I get from Reversing Labs. They're actually quite good at this, at like reversing the malware and figuring out how it got in there. If I am getting a new threat feed, how many of the ones that I already know about being tied to CVEs does this new feed cover? That's replication. And then there's coverage, which is, the iceberg under the sea part of security. I'm seeing what's above it. I'm seeing what I already have. How much deeper am I going by getting the threat feed? What's net new here? And if you measure that in a percentage-based sense, for example, and I'll give you an actual example. we have a relationship with Silo Breaker now where they're finding some exploits for us. And we've had a relationship with Alien Vault's OTX2, AT&T's, I guess, OTX2 now, the labs component there. Jaime Blasco runs that. When we look at how many net new exploits we get by buying the Silo Breaker threat intelligence feed compared to what OTX was giving us, that might be a 10% increase in the number of exploits that our customers will get access to. But the replication might be 80%. So we have increased confidence that the 80% of the exploit data that's coming from Alien Vault is not a false positive. And those are two metrics that work for us because we have a specific outcome we're looking for, which is prioritization. But once you have these two metrics, any new threat feed is really easy for me to say whether that's valuable to me or not. Because if your replication is low and your coverage increase is not positive, this feed is useless to me. I already know all the information you're telling me. I'm not going to buy it. And if you're increasing my net new coverage by 5%, but you cost $500,000, I also don't need that. I've got a budget to work with. Once the metrics are established, it becomes super easy to evaluate how those metrics are changed over time by looking at new tools.
Yeah, but now let's relate this to vitamins. When you say reversing labs, I like reversing labs because I like Mario, and I've talked with Mario, their founder, several times. And therefore, when it comes to vitamins, I want to use reversing labs, right?
I mean, that is always there too.
Yeah.
I also like them for that reason too, not just for the data.
Yeah, shameless plug for reversing labs. I do think they have, when you look at the data, they have a very good threat feed as well. I think you're agreeing as well, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm curious, from when you say net new, is there additionally, like what you guys are talking about, is there a net value add or a net value you have a net new, but you also have the ability to concisely give you accurate information, and not necessarily all new information is warranted. So is there metrics and means to those quality, that kind of net new and the quality that it provides with inside of it?
Yeah, that's the replication metric. It's really hard to measure quality. It's really hard to measure quality for me because I'm not a security researcher. But I also think in general, like somebody wrote something about a vulnerability, whether it's a number of IOCs or the existence of an exploit, it's hard to measure how accurate that information is. So the replication metric is essentially, we have 6 or 7 feeds. How many of them does this information occur in? Should tell you, like on average, an exploit should occur in 5 of these 6 feeds. Like 80% of exploits should be in all of the feeds or something like that. And if this new feed doesn't have 80% of what we've seen before, then their research isn't covering what other folks are. It's like the table stakes isn't there, is that metric.
Is that bad or good, or does it depend on the situation?
I think it depends on what you're looking for. I think you have multiple approaches here. You could have an approach where what you really want is confidence that every exploit you're recommending remediation of is in fact a risk. And then you're maximizing replication. But once you've got a high amount of confidence in your exploits, the next thing you want to do is expand your coverage. It's like you might buy, a convertible and an SUV to cover your car shopping needs, or you might buy a crossover with a moonroof. And those are two valid approaches to the same problem.
It's interesting. I still think that as we progress through this industry, we need to get better at evaluating the solutions. I think is what we're coming down to, right? It can't just be a feeling. Oh, that's part of it, right? It can't just be just looking at the data. Everyone is really a unique kind of flower in this scenario. Every enterprise does things differently. You have different systems, different people. There's a lot of factors to come down to. Even thinking about how you evaluate something might be different across organizations. I don't think it's the same process or same answer. I think some general guidelines that could help, but I don't think it's the same for everyone. I mean,
context changes the whole equation. Mm-hmm. We've got a customer that really cares about Google vulnerabilities, Chrome, Chromium, what have you. So there might be a threat intelligence vendor that provides amazing Google Chrome 0 days and not much else, which wouldn't be very valuable to somebody who really cares about Microsoft vulnerabilities. But that customer should be buying that all day.
I do want to talk about data. One of the other things we talked about when we talked about XDR, and we talked about my enchanted quadrants, there are a couple of different schools of thought. And again, coming back to, you may choose one or the other or some kind of hybrid, but I want to get your take on this, Michael, being a data scientist. In cybersecurity, we can say there are schools of thought that are like, give me all the data. Give me as much data as you want to give me. In fact, a lot of the vendors in the SIM or SIM-related spaces are like, yeah, we know Splunk's got a thing, and they charge more the more data you take in. You know what? Our model is, give us as much data as you want. We're not going to charge you more for it because we want to collect all the data, and then we'll help you make sense of it. There's other schools of thought that are like, a lot of the data sources let's stick to my enchanted quadrants for a moment. A lot of the data sources within those quadrants, some are better than others, and we've evaluated those sources and said, you know what, if we had this, and this, within those quadrants, we take Sysmon and we take authentication logs from AD and we take these threat feeds, we can produce the same, if not better, results than if you were to take more sources of data. So from a data scientist perspective, when we look at this problem, do I want more data and store all of it? Or do I want to be picky and choosy as to which data and types of data I'm taking in?
I'm trying to not misstep here.
I know I put you on the spot big time.
Yeah, my view, caveated to the fact that I work in vulnerability prioritization.
Sure.
But my view of most data science problems, not even security, epidemiology, finance, searching legal documents for bad stuff that people said in emails, a high quality outcome data set, which you can use to train a good model, plus the model, of course, is usually more valuable than a lot of data where you don't know how it was generated, you don't know its quality, it might be full of false positives.
Garbage in, garbage out, regardless of how much you're collecting, right, is the thing. Part of it is
garbage in, garbage out. Part of it is you might have more. So imagine just more variables. This is something we found when we were looking at which factors about a vulnerability are predictive of that vulnerability later being used in an exploit, just from the start. So if you use no variables, you get no information, horrible model, not very useful. If you start to add new variables into the model and try to figure out the best model you could build, at around 10 to 12 variables is where the model has the least error. And when you start moving to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80 variables, you're adding in noise into the model because your data set isn't all that great, and more information can sometimes actually obscure the model's outcomes. So in the same way, ultimately you're digging through this haystack for these needles, and limiting the haystack can be helpful. Limiting the haystack too much could mean that you're missing things. But most organizations have a risk tolerance level and a profile they're going for. And again, once you have that metric of, I want to capture 60% of malicious activity on the front end, you can start to tailor how much data collection you need to do that once you know what your success rate is.
So it sounds like one of the components that was missing in my brain is what are the variables you're collecting, right? Because you can collect a lot of data to get the dozen or so variables, right? But that's just going to reinforce your model that's already pretty good. It's more about the variables than the amount of data, right? I can say, well, I really want like destination, IP address, and port, and those are two very important variables. The more of that I get, the better. But then if I start collecting all their headers in the IP, TCP, and like full packet, then my model could start falling down.
So this might be the only valuable part of having me on the show. When we say big data, people often think we mean a lot of data. That's not the case. We mean volume, velocity, and variability of data. Those are 3 dimensions of data being big. More volume, usually always good. More velocity, not always great. So if I'm getting second by second log data, that might be not as useful as hour by hour log data if it's aggregated correctly. The resolution matters. And then variability is what we're talking about when we're talking about how many facets you collect. And oftentimes the messiest models and the messiest data comes from variability, not volume.
That's really interesting.
Because volume you can solve with dollars, but variability you can't.
That's fascinating. That's awesome.
Which is also why malware reversal or malware identification on the fly is really hard, because it actually requires a lot of variables. Whereas something like, vulnerability identification is seemingly easier because the product and vendor covers a lot of what you're talking about when you look at the vuln.
It's also interesting to draw those parallels between epidemiology. We do that quite a bit with Dr. Mike Lloyd from Red Seal. And now that you've kind of enlightened me to the more nuances of data collection and analysis, it seems like in epidemiology, we could have a set of variables, but we still just don't have enough volume of data. My wife, for example, works in healthcare, and often we collectively have these questions, and I'm like, well, if you were exposed to a lot of different coronaviruses, does that mean that you might have more immunity to the COVID-19 strain of coronaviruses? And what does that mean that you got the vaccine? So you did get the vaccine. Does that mean that you are more immune to other strains of coronavirus? And I was kind of explaining to her, like, if you in healthcare were exposed to a lot of coronaviruses, that means you might be resilient to more forms of it, regardless of whether you got the vaccine, if that makes any sense, right? 'Cause she was like, well, I don't think I'm going to get as many colds now they have the vaccine. I'm like, yeah, but if you were exposed to all those other strains, that would already mean that you were less likely to get a cold. And I'm like, likely we just don't have enough data to answer any of these questions, definitively.
Well,
there's a lot of parallels.
Because we're not collecting likelihood of cold after vaccine. That's not a thing we're collecting, so we can't really make a statement about it.
Right. And that's a direct correlation to your net. What do you want to collect so you can make decisions, maybe not today, but in the future, right? It's hard to predict what data you might need in the future for the next threat, such as solar winds might have been a newer threat for a lot of people. Did you collect the right data, right? I guess that could be an argument for collecting more data, because you never know when you're going to use it. That's always the argument that you get from especially vendors that charge you the more data you collect. You never know when you might need all that data, right? You may not need it today, but you might need it tomorrow.
It often comes down to what's the business problem you're trying to solve. If the business problem you're trying to solve is specific to CVEs, you might not need to be collecting this data, hoping that in the future you get to use it. If it's increasing your coverage of known malware variants, collect the stuff about known malware variants. Don't collect the stuff about random net flow. But if it's an open-ended problem where you do hope to comb over past data and come up with something new, those are usually costlier, and for good reason.
Questions, comments from the illustrious crew?
None here.
Very deep and philosophical about data. I loved it. We love having you on the show, Michael. Anything else you'd like to share with our audience today?
I want you to share that pineapple CBD drink that you're into.
Yeah,
it honestly sounds like pineapple pizza.
I haven't ordered it yet. I need to order just to try it, maybe to drink some on the show, because it sounds fabulous. And you would, I think, love this, Larry, because I want to say you're really into pineapple and jalapeno. So this is a pineapple jalapeno CBD drink. It's like Joe Rogan's. I forget the brand. He worked with a brand to create it.
See,
it sounds amazing. I haven't tried it yet.
I love spicy, but like drinking spicy.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. It must be. It's a carbonated energy drink of some kind. I believe it does have caffeine in it as well.
I mean, the pineapple I get. I mean,
yeah, because pineapple's awesome, right? Killcliff, thank you, is the brand. Yeah, it sounds super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It turns you yellow.
And it turns you
yellow.
Turns you yellow.
And if you take colloidal silver, maybe you turn green.
There's the exercise. How do we measure the effectiveness of it? And again, I think it just comes to, wow, like it tastes good and I don't feel horrible, so therefore I'll keep drinking it, right? Maybe that's how we make a lot of our product decisions today in security, right?
That's actually more true than we like to think, because most people switch vendors after an incident, not before.
Right.
The UX looks nice, so that's our product.
That's true. That is a component to it. Well, I mean, but usability is a thing, so.
I think we're going to do a lot better. I think that's the hope that I have for this new XDR space that's emerging. It's that in order for it to work, we're going to have to start measuring the efficacy of the subcomponents. And as vendor, like if one vendor does it, everybody else is going to have to start doing it too. And then all of a sudden we're in a world where we're actually measuring some kind of outcomes for all of these tools, and choosing between them becomes much easier for consumers.
Mm-hmm. Well, Michael, thank you very much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly. It's always nice having you on the show.
Always nice to be here.
For folks who want to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Kenna Security. Stay tuned. Dan DeClaus from PlexTrack coming up next.